Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban's romance has ended after almost 20 years together, and fans are in disbelief at how it turned out. From the outside, they appeared invincible, two celebrities who appeared to have overcome the challenges of Hollywood and fame. Red carpet smiles and sincere tributes. However, one thing was evident when Nicole eventually gained notoriety following her divorce filing. The fairy tale was over. And the reality was much more nuanced than anybody had anticipated. Instead of silence, a storm ensued. Nicole responded with silent strength, allowing her deeds to speak louder than words, while Keith stepped to the stage with unvarnished, unadulterated performances that seemed to reveal hidden agony. This was more than just a marriage ending. It was a conflict between love, celebrity, selflessness, and the inner struggles that no red carpet could ever disclose. Please hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell if you find stories like this fascinating so you don't miss the next in-depth analysis. Because we have to go back to the beginning to understand how it all ended. Nicole's early life and Hollywood rise. Nicole Kidman was a shy young girl who was striving to discover her voice long before she became one of the most famous actors in the world. Nicole's early years were characterized by contrasts. As she was born in Honolulu in 1967 while her Australian parents were residing overseas. Her father was a biochemist and psychologist who brought her mother, a nurse and school teacher, promoted creativity and nurturing, while she brought intelligence and organization into the home. Young Nicole's personality was already developing when the family finally made their way back to Sydney. But not in the way most people would anticipate for a future celebrity. Nicole had a terrible shyness and was far from confident. When called upon in class, teachers remembered that she would blush so much that she appeared to freeze. She was afraid of public speaking. However, she used her imagination to make up for her lack of confidence. Ballet provided her with an escape. She initially discovered she could communicate feelings she couldn't articulate in words in drama school and then in neighborhood theater organizations. Her shyness didn't matter when she was acting because she could be anyone on stage. Her innate aptitude was evident by the time she was a teenager. Nicole took advantage of every chance she could as the film and television industries in Australia began to flourish. She made appearances in television, movies, and advertisements before starring in the cult hit BMX Bandits at the age of 16. Hollywood was drawn to her because of that role as well as her remarkable height, porcelain skin, and expressive eyes. Nicole was quickly drawn into a world she had only ever imagined until the American film industry called. However, she still faced the difficulties of celebrity despite her subsequent achievements. The teenage actor who had previously been afraid of classrooms was now negotiating the world's largest stages while striking a balance between vulnerability and ambition. Her decisions would be influenced by that vulnerability in both her personal and professional lives. Because Nicole herself was still looking for love, family, and a place where she genuinely belonged. Even as audiences were finding a talented actress with boundless potential, she would find herself in a relationship that brought her fame, heartache, and wounds that would last for decades as a result of that search. However, another man had already permanently altered her life before Keith Urban ever showed up there. Marriage of Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise. By the late 1980s, Nicole Kidman's career was rapidly gaining momentum. Her remarkable performances had caught Hollywood's attention. And it was during this ascent that she met Tom Cruise, one of the world's biggest stars. They clicked right away, and when Nicole and Tom got married in 1990, they became one of the world's most famous couples. The tabloids have an insatiable appetite for them. They appeared to be unstoppable, youthful, and gorgeous. Being with one of Hollywood's most bankable actors seemed like entering a dream for Nicole, who had been quiet and self-conscious as a child. However, the reality behind the flawless exterior was far more nuanced. Tom had a strong commitment to Scientology, a contentious religion that soon took center stage in their marriage. This shadow was heavy for Nicole, although she almost never discussed it in depth. Reports and subsequent analysis indicated that the demands of the faith and the it-imposed controls strained their bond. However, their 2001 breakup left them with the worst wound. Isabella and Connor, the two adopted children Nicole and Tom had together, stayed mostly with Tom following their divorce. Long mentioned in public reports, Nicole went through a time of separation from them, which had a profound impact on her, but which she hardly ever spoke of. This split was terrible for a woman who had always yearned for stability and family. Nicole believes that the end of her being married to Tom was a defining tragedy in addition to a personal heartbreak. Although she rarely let her suffering show in public, she carried herself with grace. Yet there was no denying the wounds. Her opinions on love, family, and resiliency were influenced by those years. And it's no accident that Nicole was resolved to restore the family and home she believed had been shattered when she eventually met Keith Urban. Her prior traumas contributed to the explanation of why their relationship was so alluring and why she clung to it so tenaciously. Keith Urban's childhood and adversities. Keith Lionel Urban's path was very dissimilar from Nicole's, who was born in 1967 in Whangarei, New Zealand, relocated at a young age. He moved to Queensland, Australia with his family. Keith was influenced by his father Bob, who owned a convenience store but had a deep love for country music. He began playing the guitar at the age of 6, and soon he was doing small-scale local performances. For Keith, country music became both an identity and an escape, even if it wasn't particularly popular in Australia. But things weren't always easy at home. According to reports, Keith's early restlessness was caused by family conflicts and financial difficulties. Not only did music serve as his therapy, but it was also his only path ahead. By the time he was in his teens, he was performing in bars and entering talent shows, establishing himself as the sulky outsider with unquestionable skill. Keith gave his all to music after quitting school. No contingency plan existed. In the end, that gamble paid off. After years of hard work, Keith became one of the biggest new stars in country music in 1999 with his self-titled American debut album. With unkempt hair, sharp eyes, and unpolished guitar prowess, he almost instantly became a heartthrob. However, celebrity has its share of problems. Keith had started experimenting with booze and other dangerous substances by the time he was in his 20s. Controlling those habits got more difficult as his fame grew. Success exacerbated the pandemonium rather than calming him. Keith had already spent time in and out of rehab by the time he met Nicole in 2005. He was electrifying on stage. But most fans never saw the conflicts he fought behind the scenes. He lived in continual anxiety that his addictions would destroy his future, his relationships, and his profession. In many respects, Nicole was drawn to him because of that vulnerability. In addition to seeing a gifted musician, she also recognized a man who was having difficulty finding equilibrium in a society that frequently expected too much. He and she both understood pain, and it seemed fateful that they would collide to broken souls looking for solace in one another. However, history would later show that this same combination of sensitivity and passion would also serve as the foundation for their ultimate heartbreak. A little reminder, please hit like and subscribe if you're enjoying this so you don't miss the following chapter. How Nicole and Keith met to 005. Nicole Kidman had already largely recovered from her traumatic breakup with Tom Cruise. By the early 2000s, she was regarded as one of Hollywood's most esteemed actresses and had won an Academy Award for the hours behind the accolades and magazine covers, though she still yearned for something more profound: love, security, and another opportunity with the family she believed she had lost. Conversely, Keith Urban was on the other side, trajectory, with his poignant tunes and guitar-driven performances. He was quickly becoming well-known in Nashville. But despite the increased attention, he still harbored the worry that his sobriety issues may cause everything to fall apart. In many respects, when fate eventually brought him and Nicole together, they were at a crossroads. In January 2005, that fateful encounter took place at the Gage USA Gala in Los Angeles, which honored Australians who had established themselves in the United States. One of the stars of the evening was Nicole, who exuded composure and elegance. Keith was there as the country music artist that everyone was beginning to talk about. With his understated charm and growing popularity, Nicole later acknowledged that she wasn't certain he was interested when they first met. Although he obtained her number, he didn't contact her for months, despite being kind but guarded. It turned into a waiting game that might have been the end before it even started. Then, when Keith eventually extended his hand, something clicked right away. Their romance progressed swiftly after that. They were seen together in public by May, and by the end of the year, Nicole was candidly calling him the man who had captured her heart. She saw a completely different Keith than she had in the past. Keith Cruise was unvarnished, passionate, and raw. In contrast to Tom Cruise, who had been refined, restrained, and closely guarded. Nicole might have been drawn to him because he wasn't flawless. He stood for genuineness and freedom to her. For Keith, she was a symbol of grace, stability, and legitimacy, evidence that he had really arrived in life as well as in music. By the end of 2005, it was obvious to both of them as well as the media that was following them everywhere, that this was more than just a passing romance. Two lives, two worlds, and two wounded souls, who thought they had finally found forgiveness in one another, collided. And they were prepared to formally announce it by the middle of 2006. The wedding of the golden couple. 2006, their wedding appeared to be a fairy tale, even if their meeting felt like fate. Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban tied the knot in a stunning ceremony at the Cardinal Chiretti Memorial Chapel on Sydney's Manly Peninsula on June 25, 2006. The occasion was both opulent and intensely private, attended by intimate family members, country music artists, and Hollywood nobility. Nicole entered the church by candlelight while wearing a stunning veil and a Balenciaga gown. According to many in attendance, she fought back tears as she walked down the aisle. At the reception, Keith, sporting his signature long hair and guitar, serenaded her, adding a romantic and intimate touch that won hearts. For the media, it was a fairy tale conclusion, Hollywood style, mingled with the gritty grit of country music. A fitting representation of two worlds coming together. The images, which appeared in magazines all over the world, supported the story. Keith had found atonement in the arms of one of the most beloved actresses in the world, and Nicole had found a man who loved her without conditions. Hollywood and Nashville, the golden couple, had made their appearance. Their marriage was more than just another famous romance in the eyes of their admirers. It was evidence that genuine love could overcome suffering and that two wounded individuals could unite and heal one another. Nicole seems to have finally found peace after the agony of losing her previous marriage, and the severe wound of being away from her kids. After overcoming addiction and self-doubt, Keith appeared to have found his mooring. Fairy stories, however, are rarely timeless. Despite the music and candles, difficulties were already beginning to arise. Keith would admit himself into a rehab facility for alcohol misuse just 4 months after the wedding, which would be a terrible blow to their marital joy and the first public fracture in their carefully constructed narrative. Nevertheless, their wedding served as a sign of rebirth and hope at that precise moment. Two talents who had both been molded by adversity had promised to move forward together. Maybe they believed in the fairy tale as much as the rest of the world did. However, even the most lovely starts are put to the test by reality. Early cracks, rehab, and struggles. Nicole and Keith's marriage began to show signs of weakness. Just 4 months after their idyllic nuptials, Keith willingly put himself into an alcohol misuse treatment facility in October 2006. Such a finding so soon after vows may have been irreparably upsetting for many couples. It was a test of loyalty for Nicole, and she decided to take it on head-on. The timing was almost inhumane. The media jumped on the story just as Nicole was finishing up her thank you notes from the wedding. Overnight, their idealized portrayal as a golden couple was transformed into a more sinister one. Headlines portrayed Nicole as the woman who might have married into disaster and Keith as a ticking time bomb. However, she refused to allow her marriage to be defined by the outside world. Rather, she supported him by going to see him when he was receiving treatment and by deciding to keep their personal conflict out of the spotlight. Nicole's unflinching support was the anchor that held Keith solid during this period, and he later credited her with saving his life. Her presence meant more to him than love. It meant survival. However, insiders pointed to a more nuanced reality. Nicole and Tom Cruise had failed to keep their marriage intact, and she now poured herself into Keith's healing role. It was about showing herself that she could keep a family together this time, not simply about love. Meanwhile, the public witnessed only resiliency. Fans found their story to be even more uplifting evidence that love was resilient in the face of adversity. In private, however, a troubling trend was emerging. Keith had to bear the responsibility of being the one in need of salvation. While Nicole's role as caregiver and protector became essential to their marriage, it worked for a time. However, as time would prove, that imbalance had a price that neither of them had yet completely realized. However, for the time being, they came out of the crisis stronger in the eyes of the people and prepared to face the world as a team. And before long, life would present them with even more difficulties, juggling work, parenthood, and the relentless spotlight of celebrity, career requirements, and family life. The pair put a lot of effort into getting back on their feet in the years after Keith's rehabilitation. They appeared to be unstoppable on the outside. Nicole maintained her dominance in Hollywood by landing both high-profile parts, like Australia, and more personal ones, like Rabbit Hole, for which she received praise from critics. Keith won Grammys and sold out venues all over the world, solidifying his status as one of the biggest names in country music. Their romance appeared to be stronger than ever in public. Keith frequently praised Nicole in interviews with genuine sincerity, occasionally shedding tears. According to Nicole, he was the one who brought her back to life. Their relationship appeared to have only grown stronger. Based on their chemistry on the red carpet and during award presentations. However, beneath that well-preserved exterior, the pressures of celebrity were wearing them down. Distance was the first obstacle. Long distances became inevitable because Keith was often on tour and Nicole was filming all over the world. Insiders hinted that their schedules conflicted more frequently than they acknowledged. Despite their attempts to enforce standards such as never being separated for longer than a few weeks, the worry of missing family time was constant for Nicole, who bore the scars of being split up from her adoptive children with Tom Cruise. Nicole threw herself into parenthood after the couple welcomed their daughters, Faith Margaret in 2010 and Sunday Rose in 2008. She held tenaciously to the security of family life and was resolved not to make the same mistakes twice. Although Keith loved his kids, he struggled with the change. The obligations of fatherhood did not easily mesh with the restless life of a touring musician. They occasionally disagreed because Keith tended toward spontaneity while Nicole concentrated on organization. In public, however, they were able to portray themselves as a family that defied the odds and the antidote to Hollywood cynicism. Images of Nicole holding the girls at airports as Keith took care of the luggage turned into enduring mementos of their collaboration. They gave the impression of unity. But insiders pointed out the challenges of juggling personal hardships, family, and celebrity were subtly undermining their base. The world failed to notice that their marriage was gradually becoming a never-ending balancing act between stability and turmoil, obligation and freedom, and distance and intimacy. And even though everyone thought they were invincible, the seeds of future strife were being subtly planted. Just a friendly reminder to subscribe if this article has captured your attention so you don't miss the next one. Living the fairy tale in public. Struggling in private, Nicole and Keith meticulously cultivated an image during the late 2000s and early 2010s. That grew larger than they were. They were portrayed as Hollywood's unique example of enduring love through their emotional speeches, family photos, and red carpet appearances. They were characterized by interviewers as evidence that true marriages could withstand distance, fame, and addiction. Nicole frequently said that Keith had given her back her life. And Keith frequently came down in tears when giving remarks at award shows. Their love story served as a symbol of hope for viewers, in addition to being inspirational. However, a separate reality was developing away from the cameras that were blinking. They were being pulled apart by the same characteristics that had brought them together. Nicole, who was molded by previous setbacks, yearned for security and order. Keith, who was naturally restless, yearned for spontaneity and independence. Their disagreements were subtle, persistent tensions that gradually eroded intimacy rather than being explosive. According to whispers from friends of the couple, Keith didn't appreciate being the one who needed to be saved all the time. While Nicole occasionally felt like she was bearing the emotional burden of the marriage, he thought she was admirable. Strength, but occasionally felt that it overshadowed them. Although she admired his vulnerability, she was afraid it would destroy everything they had worked so hard to create. Their relationship turned into a never-ending tug of war, with one attempting to achieve harmony and the other bucking authority. These distinctions were further brought to light by parenthood. Nicole wanted to protect their girls from the craziness of celebrity. Therefore, she tended toward rules and stability. Keith portrayed the carefree, indulgent, and entertaining parent, although their daughters loved both parents. Insiders claimed that Nicole occasionally felt undercut and Keith occasionally felt chastised. The public, however, did not see any of this. They continued to be the golden pair in interviews, on stage, and at premieres. The image was strengthened by each touch, smile, and expression of love. Fairy tales, however, are simpler to act out than to live, as history has frequently demonstrated. Furthermore, it was getting more difficult to conceal those silent breaches by the middle of the decade. Rumors and denials 2015-2024 by the middle of the decade. Rumors concerning Nicole and Keith's marriage started to circulate more. Everything from conflicting schedules to Keith's nightlife and Nicole's intensity was the subject of tabloid speculation. Arguments were alluded to by anonymous sources. However, paparazzi photos occasionally showed Nicole going to functions without Keith, or Keith going on tour without his wedding band. A sense of separation between them was frequently shown in the stories, but each time the pair's response was one of polished togetherness. Nicole assured interviewers, "We've never been stronger," in a voice steady enough to allay skepticism. Keith often referred to her as his rock and the love of his life, echoing the same feelings. They firmly held hands on red carpets while grinning for the cameras as though to refute the headlines. The denials worked for years. Many fans took their statements at face value because they wanted to believe in them. However, the couple's closest friends and family noticed the work that went into the grins. According to friends, Keith occasionally became agitated at the persistent belief that he needed to be saved. While Nicole occasionally appeared worn out from playing the role of stabilizer, subtle alterations were also observed by observers. Nicole's formerly carefree grins started to appear more practiced, even if they were heartfelt. Keith's public expressions of affection occasionally sounded more like prepared phrases than genuine ones. Sentiments, their efforts to maintain the illusion were becoming more and more intense. Not that their love was phony. They held on to the storybook image in spite of the growing rumors. Every public action, such as a shoulder kiss, a word whispered into someone's ear, or a shared laugh during a premiere, became part of the mythology. However, their personal conflicts were becoming more apparent behind closed doors, and the effort required to keep up appearances was wearing them out. During 2023 and 2024, the speculations peaked. According to reports, they were alive. Separate lives and images of them going to events by themselves only served to strengthen the story. Nevertheless, the couple remained steadfast, adamant that they were one. However, as the world would soon discover, no matter how well crafted an image is, it cannot last forever. And by 2025, there was no denying the reality. The divorce 2025, the long-running rumors were ultimately verified in September 2025. Nicole Kidman officially ended her nearly two-decade marriage by filing for divorce in Davidson County, Tennessee. The paperwork merely mentioned irreconcilable differences and was straightforward, bordering on clinical. However, the weight of almost 2 decades of love, sacrifice, and quiet struggle was hidden beneath those few words. People claim that after 19 years of marriage, Nicole and Keith had already begun living apart prior to the filing, thus ending their union. This information, which showed that the split had been subtly developing for a long time before it was formally announced, made the news even more shocking for those who had viewed them as Hollywood's golden marriage. The choice was painful for Nicole. According to reports, she had been wrestling for months, with the decision caught between her need to protect her own well-being and her intense devotion to her family. She was upset but determined, according to friends. Someone who understood she could no longer be both a caretaker and a partner. She had played the stabilizer role for years, acting as Keith's anchor and keeping him grounded. However, she ultimately decided to protect herself rather than carry on a cycle that exhausted her. Practical details were also disclosed in the divorce petitions. For their kids, Sunday, Rose, and Faith, Nicole asked for primary residential custody. Keith and Margaret shared decision-making authority. This arrangement mirrored what many already knew. Keith's touring schedule made day-to-day parenting challenging. While Nicole's life revolved around the daughters, importantly, Nicole and Keith both agreed to forego child and spousal support, indicating that their money had always been kept apart and that neither was looking to benefit from the other's fortune. Nevertheless, the emotional repercussions were everything but quiet. Despite the documentation appearing composed and collected, the news caused a global gasp. Supporters who had felt disappointed and cited their marriage as evidence that true love could endure celebrity. The breakup was immediately framed by tabloids as a tragedy, with Keith being the troubled artist overcome by his issues and Nicole being the woman who had finally had enough. Keith's reaction, however, would be anything from subdued if Nicole's filing had been purposeful and constrained. A few days later, he turned a concert into an unvarnished public confrontation by walking onto a stage without his wedding band. And for the first time, his music had a greater voice than any formal declaration. Keith's onstage disclosures just a few days after the divorce announcement. At the most recent stop on his High and Alive world tour, Keith Urban went to the stage in Pennsylvania. However, this wasn't your typical country set. Rather, it was an unvarnished, unadulterated look at a man dealing with heartbreak in real time. Fans knew this performance would be unique as soon as he showed up, sans his wedding band. They were correct. His 2004 breakup anthem, "You'll Think of Me," was the event that garnered the most attention. "Take your space and take your reasons" is the traditional lyric. However, he gave a scathing variant that evening. "Take your irrational justifications." Videos swiftly went viral on the internet, with many people taking them to be a direct allusion to Nicole and the divorce. The modifications to his setlist were much more revealing. Yahoo Entertainment claims that Keith omitted "The Fighter," a 2016 song that is frequently played with Nicole in mind and is generally thought to have been inspired by her. Together with the changed lyrics, the omission stoked rumors that Keith was purposefully rewriting his musical career to reflect the dissolution of the marriage. The show was also covered by TMZ, which said that even though Keith wasn't dropping songs in the traditional sense, his selection of the setlist that evening generated discussion. Everyone agreed that it wasn't simply another show, even though some fans regarded it as catharsis and others as bitterness. Nevertheless, there were beautiful moments within the rage. Images of Keith with his daughters appeared on screen during Heart Like a Hometown serving.